Saturday morning in Otis's garage, 2 blocks down from Clifford's house in Springfield, Missouri. The two of them are underneath a 1998 pickup truck replacing an alternator that should have been replaced last year. AM radio on at a volume too low to hear and too loud to turn off. Smell of grease, and the morning coffee reheated on the hot plate for 2 hours. They're talking about nothing, the team, the price of diesel. Then Otis mentions the house on the corner got sold. The Bagleys. 70-something years old, both of them lived there their whole lives, and suddenly a sign on the lawn and a moving truck. Went to be closer to the daughter, says Clifford. Went to pay for things, says Otis. And there's a silence of about 4 seconds. Just the radio and the ratchet. Then Otis speaks from inside the engine bay, without lifting his head, the way a man talks when his mind already moved on and his mouth hasn't caught up yet. My old man paid off the house at 62. Threw a party and everything. Stood out in the yard with a copy of the letter showing the neighbors. He gives a short laugh. I'm going to be paying mine at 79. And he goes back to the bolt. For him, that was a joke. Already over. Clifford didn't laugh. He stood there with the wrench frozen in his hand and started doing the math in silence. His, not Otis's. The mortgage, which he refinanced in 2003. Because the roof started leaking in February and Denise started college in August, and the two things couldn't wait for each other. The truck, which he bought in 2021, because the old one died on Route 89 and he wasn't young enough anymore to be sitting on the shoulder in the dark. The credit card he says he pays off every month. And that he doesn't pay off every month. And that student loan he co-signed for his daughter in 2006 because she asked, and because he was her father, and because in 2006 it felt like the simplest thing in the world. Hand me the 16, says Otis. Clifford hands him the wrench. 71 years old, 31 years hauling fuel for the same company, never missed a payment in his life. And he owes more money today than he did at 40. Clifford's father was named Ellis. Ellis paid off his house at 62 and didn't owe another living soul a single dollar for the 23 years after that. Same town, same kind of work. Worked fewer years and earned less money than his son. So let's get straight to the number, because that's why you're here. The average American household headed by someone between 65 and 74 owes right now $45,000. Above 75, $36,000. That's the Federal Reserve, the most comprehensive wealth survey in the country. Hold those two numbers, and now understand why they don't work for you. Because the average isn't what you think it is. The average debt gets pulled up by a minority that owes a lot, and the number that actually tells you where you stand, the median, the American right in the middle, is a different one. I'm going to give it to you, along with the full scale by age bracket, and you'll be able to measure yourself against it today. And I'm going to show you a third thing, which is the most important of the three. After 65, the balance stops being the metric that matters. There's another way to measure. It takes 30 seconds to calculate, and it's the difference between a retiree who's fine and one who's in trouble, even if they owe exactly the same amount. If you've got something open right now and a part of you treats it like a personal failing, stay with me. Because the difference between Ellis and Clifford wasn't the two men, and I've got 30 years of data to prove it. Let me show you what I found. Before we get into the timeline, 2 terms you'll need, and I'll keep them simple. Secured versus unsecured debt. Secured debt has something tied to it, a house, a car. If you stop paying, they take the thing. Unsecured debt has nothing behind it except you. Credit cards, personal loans, medical bills. One has collateral, the other has your word. Debt to income ratio. That's how much of what comes in goes back out before you decide anything. Before groceries, before the electric bill, before the grandkid's birthday, the piece that's already spoken for. Now here's the frame for everything that follows. 62% of households headed by someone 65 or older carry some form of debt today. In 1989, that number was 37.8%. That's not a difference in behavior. That's a difference in era. To understand how that happened, you need to see what retirement looked like for Ellis. Not the nostalgic version, the documented one. Ellis signed his mortgage at 32 years old, 30-year fixed. One contract, one signature, one payoff date written on the first page. By the time he was 62, it was done. That was the party Otis mentioned in the garage, the one where Ellis stood in the yard with a photocopy of the final statement, showing the neighbors like it was a diploma. But here's the thing about that party. That wasn't a celebration of discipline. It was a celebration of termination. The product ended It had a built-in expiration date baked into the paper, and Ellis simply outlasted it. He had a pension. Defined benefit, meaning the company paid him a set amount every month for the rest of his life, no matter what the stock market did, no matter what the president said, no matter what happened to the economy. That check showed up like the mail. He didn't manage it, he didn't rebalance it, he cashed it. He had one credit card, used it at the gas station and occasionally at Sears. Paid it at the end of the month. If something cost more than what he had in the checking account, he didn't buy it. Not because he was virtuous, because the card had a limit so low it wouldn't let him. And that was it. That was the entire debt architecture of a man who raised 3 kids and retired in the same house he bought at 32. The median debt among households 65 and older who carried any debt in 1989 was $7,463. Say that number out loud. The middle of the pack owed less than the price of a decent used car. So what happened? Was an entire generation just tougher, more responsible, better with money? No. And this is the part nobody says out loud about Ellis and the people who retired alongside him. They weren't more careful. They weren't built different. They lived inside a financial architecture that had guardrails nobody asked for and nobody noticed until those guardrails were gone. There was no home equity line of credit to pull from when the roof leaked. If the roof leaked, you called your brother-in-law and bought shingles at the hardware store. There was no easy refinancing that lets you restart the clock at 52. And there was no co-signing a student loan for your daughter because almost nobody needed a loan to study. Tuition at a state school was something you could cover with a summer job and a small savings account. The products that create long-duration debt in retirement simply didn't exist yet. Ellis's debt wasn't smaller because of his character, it was smaller because it had a structural expiration date. He signed once at 32 and never reopened the contract. The debt ended before he did. That was the design. Not his design, the systems. And then one very specific thing changed. Not the economy, not interest rates, a single financial product. In 2003, Clifford sat in a bank branch in Springfield. The roof had started leaking in February. Denise had been accepted to college in August. And those two things landed on the same kitchen table in the same year. He didn't go to the bank looking for debt, he went looking for a solution. And the solution was a refinance, new mortgage, lower monthly payment, cash out to cover the roof, and the first year of tuition. The branch manager was friendly. He turned the pages upside down, pointed with a pen where to sign, explained everything in a voice designed to make large numbers feel routine. Clifford signed. New 30-year mortgage, he was 52, payoff date 2033, he'd be 82 years old. Nobody in the room commented on that. The manager had already turned the page. There's no field on a refinancing form that asks how old you'll be when the last payment comes due. No disclosure, no flag. No checkbox that says, I understand I will be making this payment into my 80s. The system doesn't care about your age when it restarts the clock. It only cares about your credit score and the appraised value of the house. And here's the thing, Clifford did the math on the monthly payment. Of course he did. He's responsible. $460 a month, down from what he was paying before. It felt like progress. What he didn't calculate, what nobody calculates in that chair, is the total cost of pushing a mortgage into retirement. Because at 52, retirement feels theoretical. At 71, it's your actual Tuesday. Clifford's story isn't unusual. It's the story of an entire generation. The average mortgage debt secured by a primary residence among households 65 and older went from $12,970 to $57,943. That's the single largest driver of the entire increase in retiree debt over 3 decades. Not credit cards, not medical bills, not living beyond their means, the house. Why did this happen to millions of households at once? Because the refinancing product arrived at exactly the moment when a generation of houses needed new roofs and a generation of children needed tuition. The product found the need. Nobody went looking for it. It showed up at the door with a reasonable monthly payment and a 30-year tail that nobody thought to trace all the way to the end. Refinancing doesn't reduce debt, it moves debt. It moves it forward in time into a phase of life where your income doesn't grow anymore, where there's no next promotion, no overtime, no second job that your body can handle. And no document in that entire transaction ever said the quiet part, you will still be paying this when you no longer have a paycheck. But the mortgage at least has a house behind it. The next category has nothing behind it at all, and it's the fastest growing debt among Americans over 62. Back to the hook for a second. I told you Clifford co-signed a student loan for Denise in 2006. Here's what happened after that. Denise graduated, got a decent job in medical billing, paid on the loan for 6 years straight, never missed. Clifford forgot the loan existed the way you forget about something that someone else is handling. It was her degree, her payments, her responsibility. His name on the paper was a formality. Then, a divorce, a cross-state move, a career restart at 31 that didn't pay what the old one did. The payments slipped. Then, they stopped. Denise didn't call her father to tell him. Not because she didn't care, because she was drowning in her own situation, and the loan was the last thing on her list. The loan didn't disappear. It went back to the cosigner, to Clifford. He found out through a letter, not from Denise, from the servicer, and by the time that letter arrived, the balance had grown. Interest doesn't pause while families sort themselves out. This is not a rare story. This is the story of nearly 3 million families. 2.9 million Americans aged 62 and older carry student loan debt right now. That's a 71% increase since 2017. And a huge share of those aren't people who borrowed for their own education. They're parents and grandparents who signed a piece of paper because their kid asked and because saying yes was what you did. Among borrowers between 65 and 74, 27% of those loans are in default. Above 75, more than half. And here's the part that separates student debt from every other kind of debt you can carry into retirement. It's the only consumer debt in the United States that can reach directly into your Social Security check. It's called a Social Security offset. If a federal student loan goes into default, the government can garnish up to 15% of your monthly benefit. No court order required, no negotiation, no warning beyond a single letter. They simply reduce the deposit. Think about what that means. Your mortgage lender can't touch your Social Security. Your credit card company can't touch it. Your auto lender can't touch it. But a student loan you co-signed for someone you love 18 years ago, that one can reach into the one income source you thought was untouchable and take a piece of it every single month. And the majority of co-signers over 62 don't know this rule exists until the letter shows up in the mailbox. So here's what matters. The risk isn't in how big the balance is. It's in which balance has access to your check. A $10,000 student loan in default is more dangerous than a $40,000 mortgage in good standing. Not because of the number, because of the reach. Now, I promised you something at the beginning. I said the average I gave you doesn't work for measuring where you stand. Let me show you why and give you the number that does. I gave you $45,000 at the top of this video. That's the average, and the average has a problem that almost nobody explains clearly. Let me make it simple. Picture 10 retirees sitting in a room. 9 of them owe about $18,000 each a car payment, a small credit card balance, manageable stuff. One of them owes $300,000, a big mortgage on an expensive house, 2 car notes, and a home equity line he took out to renovate a kitchen he barely uses. The average debt of that room is just over $46,000, but that number describes exactly one of the 10 people sitting there. The other 9 look at $46,000 and think they're doing worse than they are, or they look at it and think the country is doing better than it is. Either way, the number lied to them. That's what averages do. They get dragged upward by a small number of people who owe a lot, and they hand everyone else a distorted mirror. The number that strips that distortion away is the median, not the average, the middle. The person who sits at the exact halfway point with half of America above and half below. And the median debt among households 65 and older who carry any debt is $34,000. The average for that exact same group, $98,959. Read those two numbers again. $34,000 versus nearly $99,000. The average is almost 3 times the median. That gap isn't an error. It's a small number of households with very large balances pulling the whole country's average up and making everyone else feel like they're carrying more than they should be. So here's your actual scale. Not a national headline designed to scare you. A mirror you can stand in front of today. Households 65 to 74, average debt $45,000. You already have that. Households 75 and older, $36,000. You have that too. Median among all 65 plus households carrying debt, $34,000. And the share of households 65 and older that owe absolutely nothing at all, about 38%. Now let that settle. If your total debt is below $34,000, you're in the lighter half of the country. You've probably spent years assuming you were behind. You weren't. You were comparing yourself to an average that doesn't describe you. If you're above it, you're not in crisis either. You're in the majority. 62% of people your age are carrying something. The question was never whether you have debt. Almost everyone does. The real question is whether that debt is a problem. And that depends on something entirely different from the balance. Which brings me to the thing I've been holding since the first minute of this video. Because after 65, the balance stops being the number that matters. And almost nobody knows what replaces it. Before you retire, debt lives in a world of motion. If the payment feels heavy this year, you can work overtime, you can take a side project, you can get promoted, you can switch jobs, your income can go up, the debt stays the same, but the ground underneath it keeps rising. After 65, the ground stops moving. Your Social Security check is what it is. Your pension, if you have one, is what it is. Your portfolio can generate income, but it doesn't get a raise. The world you've entered is a fixed income world, and inside that world, the debt-to-income ratio stops being a snapshot and becomes a verdict. Here's the 30-second calculation I promised you. I want you to actually do this. Take the total you pay every month across all your debts. Not the balance, the monthly payment, mortgage payment, car payment, minimum on the cards, student loan payment. Add them all up into a single monthly number. Now, divide that by your monthly take-home income. Social Security plus pension plus whatever you withdraw from your portfolio. The real number that lands in your account, that percentage is the share of your life that's already committed before you decide anything. Before food, before electricity, before a prescription. Above 35%, any surprise becomes a crisis. A new transmission, a medical copay you didn't expect, a property tax increase. There's no room to absorb it. Below 20%, you breathe. You have margin. You make choices instead of reacting. Clifford sits down and runs this for real. Not in his head, in a garage, on paper, at the kitchen table. His total debt is $58,300. That's the number he'd focus on if he were measuring the old way. But the payment is what matters now. The mortgage, $460 a month. The truck, $310. The credit card minimum, $85. The student loan, $65. Combined monthly payment, $920. His Social Security check, $1,840 a month. 50%, half of his fixed income is already gone before he buys groceries. And here's the twist. The mortgage is the biggest slice of the balance. But the student loan, the smallest balance of the four, is the biggest threat. Because it's the only one that can legally reduce the check he's measuring everything against. If that loan defaults and the offset kicks in, his denominator shrinks. And when the denominator shrinks, every other payment gets heavier. In retirement, debt doesn't measure in dollars. It measures in months of check. And the line you owe to that has access to the check itself. That's the line you cut first. Which brings us all the way back to that Saturday in the garage and to the difference between Ellis and Clifford that I promised from the start. Here's the answer, documented across 30 years of the same Federal Reserve survey with the same methodology, measuring the same thing. Between 1992 and 2022, the average debt of American households headed by someone under 65 roughly doubled. That tracks inflation. That's the baseline. That's normal. In the same period, households headed by someone 65 to 74 saw their average debt quadruple from $10,150 to $45,000, and above 75, the average debt multiplied by 7. From under $5,000 to $36,000, read those three facts together. Everyone's debt went up, but the increase for people under 65 was proportional to inflation. The increase for people over 65 was 3 to 4 times faster than inflation, and for the oldest group, the one with the least ability to earn its way out, the increase was 7 times. This wasn't a nationwide behavioral collapse. It was a targeted structural shift. One age group received access to credit products that the previous generation never had: easy refinancing, home equity lines, student loan co-signatures, and every one of those products was designed without an age limit, without a disclosure. That said, this debt will follow you past your last paycheck. 65% of Americans 65 and older who carry debt say it's a problem. 29% call it a major problem. They know they feel it every month. They just think it's their fault. It's not. The people didn't change. The products did, the access did, the architecture did. Ellis didn't retire debt-free because he was a better man. He retired debt-free because he retired before the rules changed. And once you see it that way, once the shame lifts, you can actually open the drawer and make a decision. Clifford reorganizes. Not by the size of each balance, by who can reach his check. The student loan goes first. It's the smallest balance and the biggest threat because it's the only one with a direct line to his Social Security. Then the credit card. Unsecured, high interest, no collateral. Every month it sits there, it costs more than the month before. The mortgage stays last. Secured, low rate, tied to an asset that holds value. It's not comfortable, but it's not dangerous. That's not the intuitive order. Most people would attack the biggest number first because it feels like progress. But in a fixed income world, you don't optimize for the biggest number. You optimize for the one that can hurt your income. Clifford isn't the problem. Ellis isn't the solution. They're the same man in different eras, and the guilt Clifford carried for years was addressed to the wrong person. A few things this doesn't apply to. If you've got a mortgage locked in below 4% and comfortable liquidity on the side, paying that off early might be the worst available move. The math doesn't support it, and this video isn't telling you to do it. If you're already in collections or facing legal action on a debt, you need a professional, not a YouTube video. That's a different conversation entirely. And if you owe nothing at all, you're in the 38%. This video is context for you, not instruction. For this to be useful, you need three things: the actual balance of every line you owe, the interest rate on each one, and which of them has legal power over federal benefits. Without those three facts, any ordering is a guess. But if you're exactly where I described at the start, a list of debts, a fixed check, and a feeling that you should have done better, this changes the conversation. Because the conversation was never about the number, it was about who you were comparing yourself to, and that comparison was rigged from the start. Here's what the data actually says when you strip away the noise. Retiree debt in America didn't grow because a generation got careless. It grew because a generation received products that restart the clock without telling you when the alarm goes off. Refinancing, home equity lines, co-signed student loans. Every one of them solved a real problem in the short term and created an invisible one in the long term. And the generation before, the one that looked so disciplined in the rearview mirror, simply never had access to any of it. Ellis wasn't more responsible than Clifford. Ellis retired before the rules changed. The shame is what keeps people from opening the statement, from adding the lines, from running the 30-second calculation that tells them whether they're in trouble or just uncomfortable. And the shame was always pointed at the wrong target. You don't need to owe less. You need to measure different. Not the balance, the payment, not the total, the percentage of the check, not which debt is biggest. Which debt has access to the income? Otis still thinks Saturday morning was a joke. Clifford knows it wasn't, but now he knows why, and he knows which line to cut first. Your father didn't retire debt-free because he was better than you. He retired before the rules changed. Now you know the rules, and you know which line to cut first. If this changed how you see your own number, hit like. It's the only thing that gets this video in front of someone who needs it. And tell me in the comments which one is sitting in your stack right now. The mortgage, the card, or a loan you co-signed for someone else. Name it. I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one.